Hey everybody, welcome to Divan-a-Thon. It is our weekly film conversation with filmmakers and folks from the industry. I'm Pamela Lavitt. I direct the Seattle Jewish Film Festival, the CJAM Festival, and the JCC Arts and Ideas program here in the Greater Seattle region. We are so excited about today's conversation with Daniel Hendler about Unorthodox. We have about 200 people who've signed up for this, which is amazing. Clearly, there is an amazing community waiting to talk about it. I think we have folks that I can shout out from New York, Colorado, Ohio, Maryland, Minnesota, and Washington, DC, and Washington State. So as we're waiting for folks to filter in, I just wanted to maybe put up say a few things about this series and also put up a poll in just a minute to get a sense of your familiarity with the series. First of all, Divan-a-Thon. What is a divan? I think one of the things I want to say is that the name of this series was actually inspired by another Satmar Hasidic person who left the fold, a woman named Pearl Gluck, a filmmaker, who did an amazing short film of years ago, our grandfather and his couch in Hungary that all these amazing guys and scholars and tzaddiks came and sat on. So I think it's particularly appropriate today that we have Daniel here to talk about Unorthodox and the Satmar community in the Netflix series. Before we begin, I just wanted to also say that on Tuesday, we have another Divan-a-Thon. Usually these run on Tuesdays. And my next guest is filmmaker Tiffany Schlain, filmmaker, activist, and please go to our website at SJCCtv. Go watch some of her films. We have links to all of them. And then you can join the conversation and sign up on Tuesday. And on Thursday, we'll have a conversation about somebody who's been mapping the cemeteries of Egypt. And I'm really excited that it's a local person for our Zoom interview series. So without further ado, while we're waiting for folks to come through, Sarah, could you put up the poll, please? We wanted to get a sense of folks' familiarity with this series. So for those of you who are in the Zoom room, you can answer this. If you're on Facebook Live, welcome. You can also answer this and Sarah can try to feed that information through. We just wanted to know how many folks who are here today have actually read Deborah Feldman's book. And if you've already seen the series, could you guys, while you're coming through, put your votes in and we'll share that with folks in just a moment. And so while you guys are taking the poll, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the series and then let you know that we're going to have a talk with Daniel for maybe about 20 minutes, and then you can put your questions in. We'd like to try to use the Q&A box on the bottom, and so the chat is often a little distracting, and they might, because there's so many people. So if you could please enter your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll definitely get to them. So please answer the poll, but I wanted to say Unorthodox, for those of you who have seen it or haven't, is a new 4-part Netflix miniseries telling the riveting story of the 19-year-old Esther Shapiro, played by the amazing Shira Haas. Many of you saw her in The Zookeeper's Wife, as well as in Hulu's Deutschland most recently. It is her journey outside of an insular religious community in Brooklyn, the Satmar Hasidim, and towards her secular new life in Berlin. And this 4-part series premiered on March 26th, which is an interesting time given we've all been living kind of in a hole. And the posthumous conversations, Twitter, there's been so much conversation around this, and it's amazing to have Daniel here to try to talk through some of the creative processes and all of the work that went into building this Netflix series. But the conversation has just been incredible. Of course, it was inspired by Deborah Feldman's life and her book, her best-selling memoir, Unorthodox, The Scandalous Rejection of My Hasidic Roots, which was published in 2012 and provided the inspired narrative framework for the character of Esti as well. So what we've seen is that everybody's sort of been binge watching this, and Sarah, when you're ready, you can share with us any of the poll results. I think what's amazing is it's not only Jewish circles. Oh, interesting. This is so interesting. So for those of you watching on Facebook Live, about 20% of the folks that have joined us today have read the book. 80% have said that they have not. And the opposite completely. Most of the people that are joining us today have actually seen the series, so that's very complimentary. And only 4% have not. And so I'm just going to close that poll right now, and maybe Sarah, if you could, in a moment, we'll play the trailer. But first, I wanted to introduce our guest, Daniel Hendler, and I'm really excited to have you here. Daniel hails in part from Olympia, Washington, which was an amazing thing. He's living in Vienna and works also in Berlin, and he is an American writer that is currently living in Vienna, and he has recently served as the co-writer and story editor for UNORTHODOX on Netflix. And he's also currently the episode writer for Mapa, which is a German language sadcom, which I am really excited to hear more about. One of the things I also think we didn't talk about and will talk about is that you also worked with Michael Benaroya. Michael Benaroya is also a producer who I know here from the Seattle area on films like Margin Call and The Romantics. And I'm sure we'll get a lot more into some of your current projects and your work on this in particular. But right now, I'd love to run the trailer for those of you, maybe only the 4%, but let's take a look at the trailer for the Netflix UNORTHODOX, and then we'll start.
You escaped, didn't you?
You make it sound like I was in prison.
Weren't you?
No, but I left without telling anyone.
Why did you leave?
God expected too much of me.
الشاطخن ungetrunken من Aimens.
Was war Buchriser?
Ihr ist wie jeden einen, geherig.
Ich bin anders wie die andere Michael.
Antrzyski.
Where I come from, there are many rules.
Since dawn, heilige Pflicht, mit einem Sandwich Masche.
My family just cares that I'm a good wife and mother. I had to get as far as possible from my community. So, will you help me?
Your ticket, passport. Good luck in Berlin. Where are you from, Misty?
New York, never been anywhere else.
Dann lass dir doch mal was Schönes zeigen.
Where do you sing? Not far from here.
I have no money, no education, nothing. What's my first
Vielleicht wird gefallen, es zählt der Stoß. Sie soll was sagen, zurück.
Talmud says, if not me, then who? If not now, then when?
Wow, please welcome Daniel Hendler. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You know, I'm so fascinated. There's so much to talk about. And I've been on one other Zoom with you that went for an hour and a half. We only have about 30 minutes, but I hope we can cover a lot of areas. One thing I've noticed, having run the Seattle Jewish Film Festival for 16 years, is there's a recent rash of films that focus on orthodoxy, series, and so on. Even the fascination also with Berlin itself. You know, there's been a lot of Babylon Berlin, Deutschland, Jojo Rabbit, sort of we're returning to Berlin with some of our conversations. I don't know if you've thought about this, but what do you think is happening that we have decided to, other than Feldman's book obviously being adapted, why is there currently this rash of films about Orthodox communities and also in Berlin.
I guess I'll speak to the Berlin thing first because I feel I have a better handle on that one. But I think it's just become such a cultural and artistic mecca, not just for Europe, but from all over the world. And personally, my relationship there began just a couple years ago. And I'm not sure when it started. I mean, obviously after the wall fell, people flocked there. And I think it's just been, it's such an odd city. It still feels very divided in a lot of ways. It's so un-German. It's so un-Europe. It's just kind of its own thing. And you really feel the same as, I guess, like it was in the 1920s in Paris, or maybe in New York in the 1960s. And it's very affordable. It's one thing. So a lot of, I think, people come there to chase their dreams. And it's such a diverse city and such a welcoming city and such a kind of wounded city in a lot of ways. And that's something that really fascinated us about Unorthodox, the series, and also about Deborah's real life decision to move there. And as to the question about Orthodox, why there's a fascination with these Orthodox stories, I really don't know. I really don't know if I can speak to that. I wonder if part of it is kind of the globalization of film and television, and that we just have access now to so many, to films and series from so many different countries and cultures that, you know, like something like Shtisel, which I think is obviously, you know, because of Shira's work on it, is something that's on everybody's minds. That's something that, you know, a couple years ago, nobody outside of Israel really would have gotten a chance to ever see. So maybe it's something like that. I think in general, certainly across television, we're seeing part of the benefits of this boom of series is that different kinds of people are getting to tell their stories. And I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I think in cinema, it began probably a good 15 years ago with Ush Din, which was, you know, a film made about Hasidic communities. And then recently there was a film last year called Unorthodox as well. And many of them are coming out of Israel, which is interesting. But this is based on, at least loosely inspired. And I wanted to talk a little bit about Feldman's book and the book versus the series a little bit, because the sort of social media sphere has gotten very caught up in that conversation. But, you know, in the Hasidic world, and for viewers who don't know me, I studied Yiddish at the Columbia YIVO program, and I grew up near the Monsey Satmar community. And so while I'm not Satmar or didn't grow up that way, have a lot of familiarity working in that community. You know, there have been also a rash of books about off the derech, right, off the path, or those who have left the fold. And, you know, Boy Chicks in the Hood, you know, Travel in the Hasidic Underground, The Unchosen. There have been a lot of books, but Feldman's book particularly, what made that story particularly adaptable, and what was your involvement in that?
That actually preceded my involvement. The origins of it started, well, the show I should mention was created by Anna Winger and Alexa Karolinsky. Anna Winger is an American who's been living in Germany and Berlin for almost 2 decades and has an interesting path to television herself. She was a professional photographer and then wrote this pilot for a show that became Deutschland 83, this kind of this fun spy thriller set in 1983 Berlin. And it was actually a German language show, even though Anna primarily writes in English, even though she speaks German. And Alexa is a documentarian who did this incredible documentary. She's German, now lives in Los Angeles, half Canadian. And she did this documentary, Oma and Bella, about her grandmother and her grandmother's best friend. And that is how Anna kind of reached out to Alexa through that. Oh, I think there you see, there's Anna and there's Maria. I don't think, yeah, Anna is right there in the 2 o'clock position, I guess you'd say, 1 or 2 o'clock. And there's Deborah in the bottom left. And originally, so Deborah's son and Anna's daughter go to the same school in Berlin. So they know each other through their kids. And originally Anna had reached out to Deborah and Alexa about creating, I think, a completely different show. I'm not even sure what it was going to be, but at some point Anna said, hey, Deborah, why don't we do your book? And that was kind of how it all got started. And the reason that we, as we say, not based on, but inspired by Deborah's story, is that for those who haven't read the book, which I saw was pretty sizable, the storyline set in the Satmar community and flashbacks does more or less adhere to Deborah's story. The Moishe character was invented, but otherwise it's pretty true to her experience. And then Deborah Feldman, the real person, does live in Berlin now, but her real life journey to getting there was a lot different than Este's. And so we felt that, for technical reasons of just like having a 4-episode series, like we needed to get her there quickly. There were some reasons for doing that. And beyond that, it was just kind of more freeing. We knew the show, because of the subject matter, would get a lot of attention. Shira, I love that picture. And we felt that there's such a responsibility to do the best we could to portray the Satmar community as accurately as possible and portray that aspect of Deborah's story as accurately as possible. We felt it was a little bit freeing to have our protagonist be a fictional character, where we had a little more freedom to explore different kind of go down different roads, especially once we got to Berlin. And Deborah was happy with that too. I mean, that was something that from the beginning everybody was set on.
I mean, the collaboration is kind of amazing. Even, Maria Schrager, actress from, many know her from Amy and Jaguar. She's obviously had a Deutschland she's had an amazing, successful career, both as an actress in German Jewish films and German films as well. So it's quite a collaborative opportunity. But if we can focus just a little bit more maybe on the book, and I'm showing some images, which I love how, this was the original cover of the book, and then it becomes the, the Netflix series image. The reverse mikvah moment is what I call this moment. But you could talk a little bit about, as a writer also, and as somebody that, also edited in part, how is it that you adapt a book into something that is inspired by and has fictional elements, and where did you make those breaks, and where was it important that you stayed true?
Some of it, for us, it was pretty simple in this case, because we knew that the storyline in the past, we wanted it to be Deborah's story. But for those who haven't read the book, again, the book it's so internal. It's so much about this woman who feels, as Esti says, she's not like other girls, someone who feels like she doesn't belong and doesn't really have someone that she can confide in or someone to talk to. And I think that was the difficult part of Deborah's real story, which is challenging for adapting a TV show where you need action, you need interaction. So that was what led to some of the characters like Vivian, the piano teacher, even someone like Moisha. Some elements of it just needed to be changed to fit, to go from memoir to visual storytelling. And then the stuff in Berlin, it was just kind of looking at the book and looking at what was really inspiring, which was essentially this coming of age story of this woman who knows that she's different and thinks that it's a problem being different. And it's just thinking of like, well, what situation can we put her in where she's put in a world, in a city, in a group of people where she doesn't think that there's a problem with her for being different. She thinks it's like an asset instead of a liability. Mm-hmm. So that was and there's Deborah and Shira. Yeah. I get a little verklempt looking at these pictures now, because it was such like a family atmosphere during the shoot.
There's a of incredible religious sensitivity that was created. Obviously, this is where some of the controversy is. I've listened to the podcast Intimate Judaism, and you've had entire groups of sex therapists and Kala and Chassan Rabbanim, which are the husband and wife wedding sex therapists and teachers, have debated the authenticity, and that's where we'll get to the sex scenes in a particular moment, because that's where some of it is. But how did you get to some of the religious sensitivity? Who did you consult with, and in order to kind of at least try to, it seems like there's been a great effort to remain authentic to some of that.
Yeah, we tried our best. There were numerous research trips out to New York with Anna and Alexa and Maria, and I think some of the department heads. And then the real kind of secret weapon was Eli Rosen, and he is an ex-Satmar, or he was in kind of a Satmar adjacent community, but basically Satmar. And he now works as his story is that he plays the Rebbe. There he is on the left. He was kind of the the guru of the show, you know, like he wore the most hats of anyone, no pun intended, looking at that Streimel he's wearing, but he was our cultural consultant. He did the Yiddish translations. He helped us, you know, with props, with costumes, with accent coaching, because as, I mean, I didn't know this. I don't know how many of your viewers know, but there's so many different kinds of Yiddish. You know, there's kind of like an old world Yiddish, and the Satmar Yiddish comes from the Hungarian Yiddish, but is now very much its own thing. And you'll notice that the characters speaking Yiddish sprinkle English words throughout the dialogue. And that was something that Ellie was saying. It's kind of like it's a personal touch, I guess, for each Yiddish speaker, how they want to, where they want to use an English word here or there to punctuate things. And then we had a number of other, you know, a lot of our cast who played some of the smaller roles, like standing next in this picture you have up now, standing next to Amit. I think, unfortunately, I think his scene got cut. Oh, I'm embarrassed that I'm blanking on his name now, but he's another former member of the community. And David Mandelbaum, a lot of the people from the New Yiddish Rep that we have in the show are ex-Hasids, whether Satmar or from another community. Jeff Wilbush, our one of the stars, is a native Yiddish speaker from a Hasidic community in Israel. So we just had so many people. I mean, it was really important to Anna and Alexa that this be, you know, a Jewish production, from the writing staff to the cast, which is not easy to do in Germany. And so we kind of had, Ellie was our main consultant, but we kind of had all these different voices on set almost all the time that could give us their help out with the consulting. And as, you know, some things, this is a tightly knit community, but it's still a community made up of individuals, obviously, who have personal tastes and different preferences. It's by no means any kind of ubiquitous collective. So some of the things in the show were just a matter of, you know, Ellie telling us, like, well, this is you know, like, this is the kind of phone, you know, you have a kosher phone, but this is what would be on the phone, or this is what would be on the table at this moment. And then some things are a matter of time, right? Like, some things change over time. So things like the Eruv wire, which is, I guess, back when Deborah and Ellie were in the community, were more strictly observed. Now, some people say less strictly observed, but even reading some of the criticism.
What that is, Danielle, can you just translate what that is?
Yes, sorry. So the Eruv wire is the wire you see in the very first shot of the show, and it essentially extends the boundaries of the home outside to the neighborhood. So during the Shabbos, it allows people to, you know, when you're not supposed to carry anything, for example, outside the home, it allows you to walk around the neighborhood and kind of expand those boundaries. So as we see in the beginning of the show, women with children can go outside, women pushing strollers can go outside. And when the Eruv wire is broken, that kind of nullifies the abilities of it. So it's a symbolic way of expanding the home.
One of the things I love on Ellie Rosen's website, which the big quote at the top of his website is from his mother, and it says, "That's very nice, but when will you get a real job?" Obviously, he did a great job, and it's important, obviously, to, I think even Professor Naomi Seidman in the Jewish Review of Books talked about just the difference between the word bubby, which most of us say in Jewish, you know, Yiddish, to talk about our grandmother, to the word Bobby, which is much more authentic for her as a, you know, former Hasidic community. I think kerchiefs, people have gotten caught up on, oh, that kerchief is authentic, or this is not. And it's been interesting reading even from my own Clarkstown, you know, community board from where I grew up in Rockland County, is people have debated this, you know, line by line. But ultimately, I think Anna Winger had said that it was really an aspirational version, both of Berlin and of maybe the community. I'm curious to know a little bit more about some of the leaps, though. Deborah Feldman, of course, it took her years. She first wound up going to Yonkers, which is where I was born, actually, at Sarah Lawrence College. And then she wound up years later moving to Berlin and now lives a very different life. But in one day, Esty makes it to Berlin and her life changes. I'm curious more first about you. And so what took you to Berlin? What took you to Vienna? Where do you come from, and what's your background, and how did you relate or not relate to that?
Well, it's interesting that even though I come from I had a much more privileged journey to Europe and slower or slower adjustment period, I guess, than Esty did. I did kind of relate to it. I mean, I basically came to Europe originally for love. And that's why I ended up in Vienna, and I was living in Los Angeles, and I was working in film, and that's when I was working at Benaroya Pictures. And I kind of took a leap, not out of wanting to escape, but more wanting to come be with someone. And that relationship eventually ended. And then I did kind of find myself at this point of like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What have I done with my life? What comes next? You know, and having to kind of build it up from not from scratch, I guess, but just kind of re-find your purpose in this new environment. And for me, I so identified with that fish out of water feeling. Like I tell people here that I tell my friends in America that like I'm the weird foreign guy in Vienna and Berlin. I've been that, like what you saw in like 80s movies or something. That's how I've kind of felt a lot of times, more in Vienna than Berlin, because Berlin is a little bit more international. But I just so identified with that feeling of wanting to find your place and find your people, and realizing that it's kind of it can kind of happen anywhere, you know, like it's more about you than it is necessarily about your surroundings in some ways. So it is like this idealized portrayal of Berlin that we have. It was just kind of like this Esty leaving this environment where she knew she didn't fit in a way. You know, she comes to this place, it's scary, but it's also, Esty's tough. You know, she's optimistic, she's tough. She still is a woman of faith, which is something I don't know if it's talked about so often. And she, you know, she's looking for the good. And I think that's what she's able to find.
So just to talk a little bit more about Berlin, and then we can move on, is, you know, there's a ton of Israelis that are also living in Berlin, and talk about a reinvention. Obviously, we share a history of 60 years of reconnection since the foundation of Israel, and you know, since Berlin was, after World War II. But what does Berlin mean for? It's a home of klezmer music. It's obviously now a home of Jewish cinema. What does that mean to be working in that environment, and what does Berlin represent? Some people have criticized that you held Brooklyn to one authenticity, but not necessarily Berlin to the same thing. You know, the invention of the music part and the conservatory and the inventions that happened in that part of the series. So both personally and also from the series point of view, how has Berlin been reinvented?
Actually, well, I should say that the music school is based on a real school that is Israelis and Palestinian, or, you know, Israelis and Arabs kind of coming together and making music together. So that's completely real. Actually, some of the people who work at the real school are extras in the scene when Esty is singing her audition. So that was all, that is a real place. I mean, that the name that we gave it is fictitious, and those characters were fictitious, but the school is real. And I think Berlin, that really, it's a city of immense trauma for so many reasons. But I think because of that, it's a city that's also full of hope. And it's a place where people come to try to reinvent themselves. And just like the city has had to reinvent itself so often in the last 100 years. And I think it is something that is so fascinating. And I think it's something that, because of its kind of unique nature, so many people flock to it, and you see so many different portrayals of it that make it seem like this wonderland. But to a lot of people, it is. You know, it is a place where people go to chase their dreams, where people who are lost souls go to try to have fun or escape themselves, or find some new meaning, or find some new group, or find love, or I don't know. I think it's all of those things. And I think in that sense, our portrayal is fairly authentic to a number of young people's experiences there.
So I think Deborah Feldman said that where many people would think she left the patriarch, she also left the matriarch of the Satmar community. And I know Anna Winger, also on the series, has talked about, you know, from the beginning, you know, you were all interested in a deeply human story about the search for self-definition and freedom and community, and a young woman looking for herself in a way that she struggled. This is a scene, of course, from the Passover Seder and all the women, like the children, are at the end of this, and here are the gang of women basically in the Satmar community that are portrayed, which is not a particularly friendly portrayal of how women treated each other. So I wanted to get a sense of this kind of gender divide, but also, there's some characters. Yankee, her husband, is actually a fairly sympathetic character caught up in his own world. But how did you deal with the patriarchal, matriarchal images? And some people have said, even criticized, that almost everyone is portrayed very negatively in the Hasidic world. So how have you responded to that?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, this is Esti's story. This is the story of a woman who, as she says to Yankee, is like someone who feels different and who feels like she doesn't fit in. And I do think that, it was never meant to be a portrayal of quotidian life in the Satmar community. But I do understand that for a lot of viewers, this is going to be their first and maybe only experience with any kind of Hasidic Judaism. So I'm really glad that there are outlets online and in print and on TV for members of the ultra-Orthodox community, or just anyone, to go on and say, this isn't my experience, or you got this wrong, or, but I think in our show, and especially when it came to that portrayal, we tried to be faithful to Deborah's experience. And I think, this is something where it's like, Esti is unique. She leaves. She's someone who is not happy there. She's not really meant to be there, but the people who are there are happy. I think the people who are there want to be there. They're not being held against their will. And it's something where Babi, it's kind of subtextual, but this community really saved her after the Holocaust, right? It gave meaning and it gave faith and it gave community to this whole group of people that were desperately looking for it and had experienced this trauma. And I think it's something that even from the chatter, in the opening scene down in the lobby, of people joking and laughing and, saying oh, I wanted to go to dinner. Oh, I'm happy not to have to go to my mother-in-law's house tonight. This is normal life for a lot of people, and people are happy, and this is not The Handmaid's Tale by any means, and we never intended it to be anything like that. But the primary concern was telling this story of this woman who didn't belong, and what her experience was like, and why she felt like she didn't belong.
So some of the more difficult parts of the series are obviously about her relationship. Some have said, with intimate detail of, something that Deborah Feldman also herself suffered from, which is vaginismus, which is, kind of pain during sexual intercourse. And I'm just wondering, this is a very woman-focused project. Some of your collaborators are all women. You're a dude. How did the representation of sex in particular, what were those conversations about?
Well, this is again something that I should say, yeah, it is a little weird for me to be on the show right now talking about the story about women, and I'm a dude, but I want to shout out and say that, this was a show really made, I'm lower on the totem pole. This is really a show made by women. Anna Alexa created it, Maria Schrader directed it. Most of our department heads are women. Shira, obviously, our executive at Netflix, Rachel. So the lead creative voices, this was almost exclusively made by women. And the sex scenes, that was something, again, this was never meant to be. I almost find it a little odd that people would extrapolate Esti's experience to be everyone in the community's sexual experience. Esti has vaginismus, and it is something that's recognized by the community. The college teacher tells her about it, and it's just not something that Yankee knows about necessarily, right? And there is pressure. There is certainly pressure. That's something I will stand by. The importance of having children in this community is paramount, like it is in many communities. Like the doctor says in The Office, surely children are the most precious thing everywhere. But yeah, especially in the Satmar community. And I think for Esti, who never really had any kind of, or Deborah, who never really went through any kind of formal sex education, it was something confusing, and it was, it made her feel even more isolated and more different. And I think that pressure that built up to have children and make it feel like she was the problem, that was what we wanted to convey in the show, again, because this is SD's story. I mean, this is not every woman's story. I mean, everybody in the show, the other characters you see often have a lot of kids and presumably have very fulfilling sex lives. But yeah, that was something that we tried to hem pretty closely to the experience that Deborah had.
So those that friends of mine in the Orthodox community have said that this is a much more universal issue, right? And even the Intimate Judaism podcast talked about in general how important it is that, that people are educated about their sex lives in general. It's not just a Jewish issue or a Hasidic issue. But one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about is just the universality of this story. And I know that, I believe I heard you say that people in even Arabic speaking countries in Turkey and Saudi Arabia have watched the series, and not everybody watching it is Jewish. So what's your sense of what the meaning has been beyond the Jewish kind of chit chat and quibbling over all of this, and the meaning of seeing these representations for Jewish communities on screen? Who has it been important to? What have you heard about from other communities?
Well, that's been the most heartwarming part of the response to me, is just following on the Facebook group or seeing some of the response and hearing that someone from, like, I come from this, Christian community or Muslim community or secular community, and this was my story. Like, this is something where I didn't fit in. I had these issues and I had nobody to talk to about it. And finally I found my people, or found my some semblance of comfort. And even some people were saying, I'm in this community right now, and I feel these things, and I don't have anyone to turn to. And it has been inspiring. And then it's just been, I think again, going back to what I said before, this is really the story. This is really a coming of age story more than anything else, more than it is a story of this and of any particular community. And I think that's why the response has been so universal. And it's been interesting for us too. When you make a show, a little European show on Netflix has these, like, all these great programs like House of Cards and Orange the New Black and Flinch. And it's like, everybody's watching all these shows, and we didn't know how many people were going to find ours. And it's half in Yiddish. But I think it really is the fact that it's it's a coming of age story. It's a story of trying to find your place in the world and of feeling different. And I think that's something that everybody's experienced at some point in their lives. And it's been crazy. Like, we see these little top 10 lists on Netflix, and people send us screenshots, and it'll be top 10 in Argentina or in Turkey or Saudi Arabia. And it's been, clearly it struck a chord.
Mm-hmm. As a writer, showing some of the scenes from her transition to Berlin, some people have been a bit critical about the sublimity and the joy and the light and the opening, and her finding Robert, and the love scenes with him are fantastic. And the transition to Berlin in one day, and, rock music. I'm just sort of wondering, as a writer, what's your sense of that as a transition? And could you talk a little bit about your particular role on the set as well? Yeah,
so I came on, most TV traditionally is made with a larger staff of writers, maybe anywhere from 5 to 10, and you all get together in a writer's room, and it's like kind of like a regular job. You show up every day at 9, and you stay till 5 or 6, and you break story, and you talk about where you want to go, and then individual episodes are kind of doled out to individual writers. And so everything's kind of written collaboratively, but then individual episodes are written by specific people, and then the showrunner will go back through and rewrite to make sure it all has the showrunner's voice. And Unorthodox was kind of a unorthodox show to make, because it was so fast. It was, Anna likes to say it was the fastest show ever made, which may or may not be true, but we certainly had to move really quickly. And basically it started with a pitch from Anna and Alexa. I think that was in October of 2018, and they got green-lighted off this 3 or 4 page pitch document, and then had to start writing immediately. And we started filming in mid-May the next year, which is just a couple of, like, what is that, 6 months to cast, write scripts, get the production team together, do pre-production, all of the things you need to do to make a show. And then they needed a third writer. And so then that's where I came on board. So by the time I joined in December, Anna had just finished the first draft of the pilot script, which is pretty normal. Usually when you're another writer coming onto a show, you'll have a pilot script to work with. And there was not really any traditional writer's room. It was just like Anna and Alexa were the showrunners and pumping out scripts, and then different scenes would be written by different people, or Anna would need this scene rewritten, or we had to, like, writing the wedding scene took a long time because it was so research intensive, doing the Seder scene, and all of it was kind of a jumble. We didn't really have individual episodes. Everything was kind of all written together, and things would move between episodes as we went along with the drafts. In my role, I mean, I have the title story editor, but that's really just a fancy term for like a writer-producer type thing. I guess in the TV industry, what you call me is the second, which just means like the showrunner has another writer on staff who's like kind of the representative who can write scripts, but is also on set every day. So in addition to doing to working on the scripts and all the pre-production stuff, I was there on set every day, and that can be anything from making sure what's written works well. Sometimes something has to be rewritten on the fly because this location doesn't work. One of our Berlin actors had an emergency appendectomy right before we were filming the scene at Wannsee, which required us to write a whole new character and adjust that scene really quickly. And then sometimes it was just like, it was moving so quickly, a lot of it wasn't ready by the time we started filming. So some of the times I would be on set, I'd watch to make sure that the takes went well, that the script was working, that, if the actors had questions, they could come to me. If they wanted changes, they could come to me. And then some of it was just on downtime, writing scenes or rewriting scenes that were going to be filmed, the next day or a week later. And some of it was changed. Like sometimes it was seeing something and filming till midnight and then looking at something that's going to be shot the next day and just saying like, man, this is not working, this needs to change, and then going home and rewriting it 2 a.m. and then, sending it to Anna and getting it approved and then getting it to the actors. And it was really intense, but it's also kind of thrilling because you go from the screenplay, when you're in pre-production, when you're just writing, it's an artistic document. You're writing it only thinking of story, only really thinking of character. And then as soon as it goes into production, it becomes kind of more of a technical document. You have camera people, you have makeup, you have production design, you have actors. Everyone's digging into these different aspects of the script and trying to figure out like, okay, how do we take these written words and make it reality? And then the type of writing you do and the type of problems you're solving becomes a lot different, right? You have to it becomes kind of more like the art of the possible in certain ways, which can sometimes be restricting, but sometimes you end up getting something really beautiful and something much more authentic and full of voice and heart than you would if you had time to, turn it over.
Yeah. Well, I have so many more questions, but I think folks that are joining us on Facebook have a lot of questions and I want to get to them. I had just shown one of the images that the gun scene really was very upsetting for me. And I know Moishe is a made up character. And so I have questions about that, but let's go ahead and let's get to some of folks' questions here. So the making, obviously, of Unorthodox, one person just commented, and you don't have to answer this, said was really informative. So I do recommend that folks watch the making of as well, which is on Netflix. Here's the gun question. There we go. Was there something taken out of the series around the gun? Why was there a gun at all?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So the origins of the gun, it's hard to even keep track of the twists and turns of it. But basically, I think when you have, it kind of goes back to the character of Moishe, which is also an interesting story, that, Moishe's evolution, at first he was a lot older, that character. We were trying to find the kind of right voice for him. And, Jeff came in. I was not at this casting, but as Anna and Alexa have talked about elsewhere, and I think Jeff has talked about elsewhere, I think he came in at the end of one day and he sat down and he's like, this is my story. This was me. I left. And he brought so much to that character. Like, it was really Jeff's idea to have him be someone who had gone off the derrick recently himself. And that really, for me, because I really loved writing for that character, really connected with me. And it was something where with, you know, if you look at Esty and Yankee and Moisha as kind of a triumvirate, you know, you have Esty, who from the beginning is pretty, like, she knows that she wants to leave. And I think you always get the sense that if it's going to be, it might be a hard road for her, but she's pretty confident that she doesn't belong in this community. And you have Yankee, who's someone who feels very comfortable in the community and has never even questioned his place in it. And even at the end, in my personal opinion, it's like he's so wrapped up in the moment with Esty, but he's not somebody who really is ready to leave or wants to leave that community. And then you have Moisha, and he's someone who did leave and he couldn't make it on the outside and he came back, which is so many people's story. I mean, the real stories of people who leave, which is detailed, I mean, there's a great organization called Footsteps, and I think Ellie's talked about this too, is that people kind of have a foot kind of half out the door for a little while, or you leave for a bit and then you end up coming back.
I think Footsteps is also featured a lot in One of Us, which is another Netflix series.
Right, yeah. And so for Moisha, I think part of it for him is that there's this almost like resentment that even though he doesn't, you know, he's Yankee's cousin, he knows Esty in the sense, but I think there's this sense that it's like, I couldn't make it on the outside. This little Majel is not going to make it, you know, like, and so for him, part of it was the tease of, you see this Moisha, you know, is someone who I almost like to compare him to like Don Draper from Mad Men, where there's like daytime Don Draper who behaves himself and nighttime Don Draper who goes off and like kind of indulges his worst impulses. And for Moisha, it was something like when he was out of Berlin, when he was back in the community, he could kind of keep these impulses in check. But when he's sent back to this place, back into the lion's den, all these demons kind of reawaken in him. And he kind of becomes, I think you notice in the episodes, he kind of becomes a different character when he arrives in Berlin. Like, he's a little more playful, he's a little more outgoing, but he's also a lot more dangerous and a lot more self-destructive. And so part of it was the tease, where you see this kind of tough, big, imposing guy is like, what is he going to do with the gun? And I think when he ends up giving it to Esty, it's, in a way, it's a very horrific, violent act objectively. I think from Moisha's perspective, in a way, it might be almost his way of offering her mercy in some sense, of thinking like, I didn't make it, you're certainly not going to make it, and you don't want to go through what I'm going through right now. Like,
it's a very different break from when Yankee almost cuts off his payas, which in Berlin, to do that, which is what Germans and Nazis did to Jews in the World War II. Those were two contrasting scenes for me of their ultimate transgression. But we have so many questions. Let's try to rapid fire this and see if we can get through some of these. Some of them are really great. Obviously, we could talk about Shira Haas forever. There's some great interviews with her, but somebody did ask about the casting process and her in particular. She was so perfect for this role. She is also the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors, Israeli actress. Maybe just say a couple of quick things about Shira, and then I'll give you the second question. Was there anything on the cutting room floor that broke your heart?
Shira, like, superstar, brilliant, casting direct, got her in Israel. She did a read with Yankee, with Amit Rahav, who played Yankee. Amazing chemistry, and just like, cannot believe she just turned 25. She's so talented and just lovely person. Like, I can't say enough about her. She's incredible. I'm so glad the whole world knows how talented she is now, if they didn't already. Weirdly, for a TV show, we did not leave much on the cutting room floor. We shot so quickly and wrote so quickly, and we're thinking did so much editing in the writing process that there's one scene in particular that was cut that kind of was an explanation of the Eruv wire, basically, where there's somebody, it's Moisha, and it's someone from outside the community, like a handyman, fixing the wire, and Moisha explaining to this guy the importance of fixing the Eruv wire. But ultimately, it was something that we felt, I mean, this is my personal preference. I'm not the showrunner, this was Anna's decision, but my argument was, I like television where, it expects the audience to kind of learn the language of the show and not the other way around. And it's just something that didn't feel like it. It felt like a didactic conversation. It didn't feel like something that would actually be happening in this world. And we felt that you got what you needed to know about the A Revoir. And the way people watch television now, it's like anyone interested in the show can Wikipedia what this is, or can look up and read more about it. And that's what we hoped people would do. Like, we hoped people would be interested enough to want to dive in.
There are so many people asking if there'll be a second series or if you'll continue Este's story. And I'm wondering whether or not, because of the success of this, and that's the first one. I'm putting two together because we're trying to get through these. And the second one is, have you heard back from the Hasidic or Satmar community and their response, and what has it been?
Yeah, I guess answering the second one first, I think the response has been mixed. I've read some of the responses. It seems like a lot of it is, kind of personal. People saying like, this wasn't my story. This isn't my experience in the community. Ellie engages with that a lot more. But just as often as we've heard negative responses, we've also heard from people still in the community or having had left the community saying this was so meaningful. I felt like I identified so much with Este. So I'd say the response has been mixed. But like I said before, I'm so happy that there's so many outlets for people not happy to voice their opinions, because it's great. Everybody deserves to be heard in portraying a underrepresented community. I think that's really, really important. And the first question, her story ends so beautifully, don't you think? I don't know. I feel like Este, this feels like the perfect point to end her journey, and which is a nice way of saying that there will not be a season 2.
Could have taken another. Interesting. I think that there's hope. You should continue to think about it. So for last question, I'm sorry everybody why I couldn't get to all your questions. There's some great ones and I'll just put them out there, but I think we'll have to get those in another. You have a Tuesday conversation as well, I think, on Facebook. Where can people find out about your next and upcoming projects, and tell us about your next and upcoming projects as well?
So I have a couple in the works right now. I guess the most exciting one is I'm doing a new one with Anna that is, I guess you could almost say, kind of a spiritual sequel to Unorthodox in a way. It has some ties to it. It hasn't been officially announced yet, so I'm going to keep that mysterious for now. But I guess keep an eye out for maybe later in the summer for an announcement about that. And I'm working with Alexa again, which I'm also happy to say. So we are also writing something that will be in the US that I guess not surprisingly is completely separate from Unorthodox, but thematically in terms of kind of like a coming of age story, somewhat similar. So I can't say anything more than that for now, but I guess just, keep your eyes peeled on the internet for announcements in the coming months.
Well, as challenging as I'm sure it was to create a cast that spoke all in Yiddish, and I'm sure many of them didn't, I know that Shira's journey is one of finding her voice. I think, Daniel, you're also finding your voice through these projects, and we really look forward to seeing what comes next for you. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I especially want to thank my guest, Daniel. I wish we had more time. This is a great conversation, and I hope that we can continue it. Looking forward to seeing people for Tuesday's interview with Tiffany Schlane. Daniel, is there anything else that we didn't talk about or that you wanted to mention before we say our goodbyes?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to shout out everyone who's seen the behind the scenes documentary. You can see them, but our costume designer Justine Seymour, incredible. Those fake Strymals that did not cause harm to any living creatures are all from her. We had just Silke Fischer, our production designer, and she did all the aluminum foil. She made everything in Berlin look so authentic to Williamsburg. Wolfgang Thaler, our incredible DP, who was just like made everything beautiful. Of course, Maria Schroeder, just like every department head, everyone who worked on the show, who was much more important than me, did such a fantastic job. And I feel very grateful that I can ride their coattails and get some kind of credit for all of their good work.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I know we didn't even get to talking about the entire New York Times article about the Strymals alone. There's so much to read about this and so much to see if you haven't seen the series or read the book. But Daniel, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing you in healthier times back here in Olympia, Washington, and hopefully at the Seattle Jewish Film Festival, which hopefully for those of you watching, there'll be an announcement soon about this postponed 25th anniversary. So check out our Facebook page at Seattle JFF. Thank you, Daniel, so much for your time. It was great talking to you, and thank you all for joining. Stay healthy and safe.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.